Started 7:06. I'm sorry? You need the mic? No, I think Paul's got it. Yeah. So, good to see everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Pray everybody's doing well. Paul's got it. He's good. Yeah. Appreciate that for next time. We did you see we put tape over his mouth. Yeah. Good. All right, let's go ahead and get started, everyone. Appreciate everybody being here. Hi, how are you? Great to see you. Good to see you. How long are you here in town for? I'm leaving tomorrow. That was a short visit. Oh my goodness, that's scary. Anyway, we're ready to get started. Welcome each and every one of you to Ascent Bible Church's Wednesday night Bible study. Again, just by way of reminder and a little bit of review, this is an opportunity for you as a group to ask any questions that may come up as we get into. Everybody except Van Stone can ask questions. In fact, we have a piece of tape over his mouth tonight. And we're not kidding if you... But no, I'll tell you what, I appreciate Van, and he has some very thoughtful questions, and I really am grateful for the kind of interaction that plays out when we're together, and that's just by way of a reminder for you. This is about you and making sure that together that we understand what we're really focusing on. You're obviously all familiar with our series, which is Signs of the Times, which actually is a biblical phrase found in the book of Mark, in the Gospel of Mark. So, but really our focus is not to really look at the phrase in Mark, but look at the passage in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter number 24. This is where we have been camping out, and we'll continue to unpack this chapter kind of verse by verse over the next several weeks as we prepare you for the second, or actually the third part of our series, probably sometime in January, February, whenever that is. We're not going to rush through anything. As you can tell, we're in part 2 of sign number 3 because there was a lot of discussion going on last week, and praise God for that. But the idea here is to kind of just lay a foundation, looking at the end of times, as to use a phrase that the disciples used in asking Jesus about where this world is finding itself, the end of the age or the end of the world. And all we're doing right now is looking at some things that Jesus imparted to these guys in that sermon, which is known as the Olivet Discourse. Anybody want to remind me why it's referred to the Olivet Discourse? Who can remind me? Anybody except Van. Say that again, Jack? That's right. If you remember from our opening intro a few weeks ago, Jesus does something really profound. As a matter of fact, we'll read it quickly in the text. But Jesus is pretty much done with anything that he has to do with the nation of Israel at this point in history. The kingdom has been rejected. The king has been denied. And at this stage, he's preparing to go to the cross. And what's really cool is he prepares to be crucified. He gathers his followers, the disciples, one last time and begins to expound and reveal to them some incredible truths about the last days. So that's where we find ourselves. Again, the idea here is just to prepare us as a church practically. I want us, and that we're going to see some of that tonight, and also in a couple of kind of extracurricular activities that we're going to have to share some things. But it's not just about preparing us for whatever this world throws at us, but that is definitely a major part. But also to prepare us for what we're going to learn as we really start to delve into this kind of material in the book of Revelation. If you remember this passage that we shared with you when we kicked off our study way back in 1 Chronicles chapter number 32, I believe it is. If you don't mind, turn there real quick because I want to just share with you some thoughts or a significant thought. Actually, it's not 32. It's verse 32 of chapter number 12. I'm not sure why I told you chapter 32. But even doctrinally, this is an interesting passage because you see King David, who is the rightful king of the nation of Israel in the Old Testament, getting ready or in the process of confronting the counterfeit king in the story, in this part of this part of 1 Chronicles. Anybody want to remind me who that counterfeit king is? Oh, I'm sorry, 1 Chronicles chapter 12. Yeah, I'm sorry. 1 Chronicles chapter 12. I just want to share a thought before we start delving into our thing. But anyway, the counterfeit king in the story, and if you look back and if we apply principle number 4 of how to study the Bible, there's a doctrinal application to this whole part of Chronicles where Saul, if you look at your list of 18 types of Antichrist, King Saul is one of the types of Antichrist. So that's what he pictures, even prophetically. And King David being the rightful king is a type of the Lord Jesus Christ. And you see the battle for the kingdom playing out in this part of the story. And what's really cool in this passage that we're about to read, David begins to, or God begins to reveal to him and prepare what are known as his mighty men of valor. And he identifies a group of men from each of the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel in the text. And keep that in mind in principle as it relates to the church, because this is really key for us as Ascent Bible Church in the area of preparation, in knowing and understanding what's going on in our world so that we could be better prepared. And I pray, and that's hopefully our theme moving into 2023, that I just want to be found ready. Ready for what? Ready for his return at any moment, but also ready for whatever and be prepared for whatever this world throws at us. And then get ready for some fastballs, man. I guarantee it. So that said, this is what I want us to consider as we look at this passage, because these guys that began to show up that are known as David's mighty men are ready warriors, man. Ready to go to battle. And look what is said of a particular tribe here in verse number 32. And of the children of Issachar, which were men, and here's a key thought, that had an understanding of the times. Isn't that cool? That's my hope and prayer for you and for us as a church, is that we have an understanding of the times in which we find ourselves, to know what Israel ought to do. The heads of them were 200, and all their brethren were at their commandment. It's a select few, man, a remnant, but you know what? They're warriors. And what I love about this passage is they had an understanding of the times so that they could impart to the people, to the nation, what they ought to be doing. So that's kind of what we're going to be heading into, delving into, especially tonight in this part of our little sub-series on There Shall Be Famine or Famines. And that we kind of introduced the whole thing last week. So just by way of introduction, by way of reminding us, one of our key goals is just, I want us as a church and you personally to have an understanding biblically of the times and the day and age in which we find ourselves. And that's really all Jesus is doing with these 12 guys in the Olivet Discourse. Amy, could you do me a favor and can you throw that picture up of Larry and I real quick? I think it's at the very bottom of the slide deck. This is just to kind of give you some perspective because I do see some new faces in the room. But where Larry and I are standing, right where we're standing in the place where tradition teaches or reveals, because there's a little church there, a Catholic church, mind you, where this actual event took place. Jesus is at the temple. If you look at where the Golden Dome is today, you see that wall around that Dome of the Rock structure. That is an Islamic mosque today. And are you not blown away with the fact that Jews, like never before, are being extremely bold and going up there to pray? There were literally thousands of them on the Temple Mount in these last 10 days between the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and the 8th day of the Feast of Tabernacles, which ended on Sunday the 16th, just 3 days ago. They are going up there like never before, man. I'm telling you, man, we're living in a different world. That was unheard of just a couple of years ago. When we were up on the Temple Mount, right, walking right towards the Dome of the Rock just 3 years ago. When were we there last? I forget. Somebody remind me. 2019, 20, 18, 19, whenever it was. There was a group of young Jewish guys wearing their yarmulkes and their prayer shawls that were walking next to us. And there was like 4 or 5 Israeli security force dudes escorting them up to protect them, because there's a lot of Muslims on the Temple Mount, because there's 2 mosques on the mount. And they're guarding these guys and making sure that they're going to get safe passage to the top of the mount so they could do whatever it is that they were going to do in terms of their prayers. That said, that's not an issue anymore, man. There were literally hundreds of Jewish folks just on Saturday and Sunday. It's I'm telling you, man, it's an interesting time in which we find ourselves. You guys have already heard about the red heifer stuff. When we get to I think it's sign number 7 or 8, when we look at the parable of the fig tree, we're going to really unpack a lot of that stuff and some of the things that are happening right as we speak, as God prepares the nation. So what Jesus is doing in the Gospel of Matthew 24, he's revealing to his followers the actual events that are going to play out in this particular area right here. He sits them down right where Larry and I are standing. And if you look behind Larry's left shoulder, there's the Dome of the Rock. It's not that far away, maybe 100 yards at most. And in between the Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives, if you look at the 2 pictures on the right now, it used to be in Jesus' time, that hill was completely covered with olive trees. It was an olive grove is what it was. You know what's there today? Graves. Jewish graves. You know what they're waiting for? The return of the Messiah, so those folks could be resurrected. There's some bits of truth that they get. What they didn't get was that the Messiah already rose at the first coming. So when are they actually going to experience? I'm not going to say they're going to actually experience, but they're traditionally in Judaism, they're burying their family members there because of the resurrection messianically on the Mount of Olives. And all that gray stuff is nothing more than graves. So as you make your way off to the right, there's the Eastern Gate. And I think the battery on this thing's dying a little bit, but that here is the Eastern Gate. Yeah, it's dying. And that's through where Jesus is going to enter. You notice anything interesting about the Eastern Gate? There's 12 gates around the old city. It's walled up. Anybody know who walled it up? The Muslims. Because the Jews in the book of Joel and the book of Zechariah were revealing to the Jewish people that their Messiah would enter through the Eastern Gate. And they walled it up. So that's facing east. You can't see the gate from this side. And then over to the left where it says Kidron Valley, that is the valley that separates the Temple Mount from the Mount of Olives. A little tiny valley. Here's what's really crazy. That church there, over here do you see that church with kind of a gold facade in the front? Gold mosaic stuff. Are you ready for this? That is known as the Church of the Nations. You know what's really wild? This valley, the Kidron Valley, is also known as the Valley of Jehoshaphat, where Jesus is going to judge the nations in Matthew chapter 25, the judgment of the nations. He's going to split the Mount of Olives. And that little Kidron Valley is going to be massive because God's going to gather all the nations, both sheep and goat nations, Matthew 25, and judge them. And there's a little church there called the Church of the Nations. I'm sure that's a coincidence, huh? Just to the north of the little church, you can't see it in this picture. I should have taken a picture, is a small olive grove, and that is the Garden of Gethsemane. And you guys know about the Garden of Gethsemane, huh? That's where Jesus went to pray when he was arrested, where he wept, where he prepared his heart to go to the cross for you and for me. Amazing place. So real quick, this is what our outline looks like in terms of the signs, and there's 10 of them that we're going to be covering. We're at number 3. We've been at this since August, and we're already in October, middle of October, so we're going kind of slow, and that's okay. But we're at part 2 of the famines thing. My hope was to finish the famine stuff last week, but there were a lot of really good questions and a lot of really good discussion as we were preparing you guys. So again, real quick, just by way of review, look back with me in Matthew chapter 24, just to give you some context. Again, just laying the foundation as we start to look at these various signs. It says in verse 1, and Jesus, when he went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came unto him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And here's your context. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us, there's their question, tell us, when shall these things be? So there's the setting. Jesus is at the temple. He departs the temple. He makes his way down the Kidron Valley up to where Larry and I are standing roughly. And he gathers them together, and he begins to reveal to them all the things that are going to play out at his return, at his second coming. And how do we know that? Look at the rest of the passage here. And what shall be, and they're asking a second question, or actually 2 more questions. And what shall be the sign of thy what? Of thy coming. Isn't it interesting that they would even ask about his return while he's in their presence? That's an interesting thought. So already he had revealed to them, whether they understood it or not, or grasped it or not, that he was going to be crucified, he was going to be buried, he was going to rise again. And they didn't have a good grasp of his return. But then they ask this next. Watch this. And what shall be, what shall be the sign of thy coming? That's hence the title of our series. What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the what? And of the end of the world. And that's what we've been unpacking. That's what we've been looking at. And Jesus answered, and he said unto them, take heed that no man, the very, very first thing he says, the very first thing that's going to be happening and playing out in the last days is what? Deception. Let no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. If you're curious about what we laid out during that little sub-series, we did a thing on let no man deceive you. And I think those videos are already on YouTube if you want to go back and see what the whole thing's about. But there's a lot of deception going on in the name of religion, in the name of Christianity. And this is why I absolutely love where God has us as a church, because before we delved into the book of Esther, we were studying that infamous letter in the New Testament known as the letter to the what? Colossians, right? The letter to the last days church. And why is it referred to as the letter to the last days church? Or why is Colossae, the letter in our New Testament, referred to as the letter to the church of the last days? Because of what? Because of where it sits, right? Laodicea. The last church mentioned in Revelation chapter 3, verses 14 to 22 is the Laodicean church age. And then the rapture happens. Very last church. If you remember from that study, Colossae and Laodicea were what? sister cities, Albuquerque, Rio Rancho. Just a river, the Lycus River, separated the two communities. One church was lukewarm. It was in a dark place. The church across the river, Colossae, man, they had it down. They understood exactly what their purpose was, their role. But one of the things that you find in that second chapter of that letter is Paul warning those believers in the last days, don't be deceived. Don't be beguiled by enticing words, by slick willy preachers needing money for 2, 3, 4, 5 jets. All the craziness that goes on in Christianity. And here we find ourselves, right? The church, for the most part, this is why I'm so encouraged with what God's doing with you guys and in us as a church. We're those, and I'm praying that remnant, those Issachar soldiers that have an understanding of the times so we can tell Israel what to do. That's where we find ourselves. So just by way of review. And then you get into verse 6, and this is where we're at as part of this dissertation or this discourse, Jesus revealing to these guys all the events. It says in verse number 6, and ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. Remember that part of our study? I'm going to do this every week. I'm referring to this as breaking news of wars and rumors of wars, just to kind of keep you updated. So I'm going to give you real quick an update of some of the things that have transpired just since last Wednesday, just from the weekend. Are you guys ready? This happened on Sunday, October. I'm going to do it like this. I've already got them categorized. We're going to look at what's going on in U.S. and Europe. Those are kind of connected. I'm going to put those at the top of the list primarily because it affects us, right? We know what's going on in the Ukraine specifically. And then we'll also look at some things going on which also affect us with China and the Far East or Asia. And then we'll look at perhaps the most important part of where Jesus is. We're going to be looking at some of the events that are happening in the Middle East and in Israel. So that's going to be the stage, frankly. That's where everything's going to ultimately play out. But until that happens, like Jesus said, like Jesus revealed to his disciples in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 21, verse number 24, there's going to come an end to the times of the Gentiles. The period where Gentiles rule will come to an end ultimately. And this is why you see Europe at one point, whether it be the British Empire or the American Empire as we know it today, these Gentile kingdoms ruling from the days of Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian kingdom, way back in 600 BC when the Jews were taken captive, and then later the Persians, which is where we find ourselves in the book of Esther, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans. Well, guess what? Rome has never lost control since it was transferred to them by the Greeks. She just morphed into a different system and a different mask, if you will, where she went from being pagan to being papal. But at the end of the day, that's the puppet master ruling and controlling the planet. Just so you know, just be straight up, man. That's why there's 2 chapters in the book of Revelation that we're going to look at some point where we're going to unpack that system. So that's kind of where we're at. We're still in the times of the Gentiles, and there's been a series of kingdoms that have been in power in Western civilization since that baton was passed on to the Romans, where Roman went from being pagan Rome to papal Rome. And we're there, folks. Exciting times in which we find ourselves. And as of Sunday, October 16th, just so you guys know, several countries are removing their citizens from both Ukraine and Russia. Embassies are closing as of last Sunday. Moscow is preparing parking lots and metro stations as bomb shelters as of Sunday. Belarus, which is known as the White Russians, right? The Slavic peoples just to the west of mainland Russia, is now embracing their role in the coming war with Ukraine. As a matter of fact, Belarus has already positioned and has already staged 70,000 troops on the border of Ukraine as we speak, as of October 16th. 9,000 of those, or 9,000 Russian soldiers are lined up. And if you were, and I don't have a map, I should have thrown one up, but that's okay. If you look at the capital of Ukraine, which is Kyiv, or Kiev, depending on how you want to pronounce it, just 90 miles to the north of the capital city is the border to Belarus or Belarus. So they're already positioning soldiers. So you're going to see a two-front. Remember we talked about this last week? The Russians strategically did what they did. They referred to this excursion into the Ukraine back in February, not as a war. The West, NATO, America, the U.S., and the Brits and Europe were referring it to as the war in Ukraine. They never referred to it as a war. You know what they did? They sent a whole bunch of poor, low-level troops, janitors and teachers that they recruited. They throw them in tanks, and they just started probing. They sent convoys into Ukraine, and they were getting massacred. And the West is saying, wow, look at how the Russians are getting massacred. You haven't seen the main part of the Russian army. You have not. So they're moving from what they were referring to as a special military operation, SMO, to all-out war. That's what they're preparing for. You need to know that. Just know that. And one of the key things, and I think it was more of a test that Putin was doing with the West, was annexing the Donbass, the eastern part of Ukraine. It was a huge test. What are they going to do? So once they annexed, and that was done, what, 2 weeks ago? Remember when we laid that out on a Wednesday night? What does that mean, annex? Like when the city of Santa Fe annexes and they continue to expand their city limits. You know what they're doing? They're taking land, and that's exactly what they did. So what was eastern Ukraine just 3 weeks ago is now part of Russia. So what does that mean from a strategic, tactical battle perspective? If anybody does an incursion into that annexed part of the former Ukraine from a Russian perspective, you're at war. It's time to take the gloves off. So that's one front. You know what the second front's going to be? What's happening right now with those 70,000, actually 79,000 troops, 70,000 Belarusians and 9,000 Russians on the border of Ukraine, on the northern border in Belarus. That's where we find ourselves. As of Sunday, 3 days ago. Today's Wednesday. On Monday, October 17th, 2 days ago, you guys already probably heard about this. Kiev was hit with a bunch of kamikaze drones, they're calling them, right? Have you guys seen that? Barely makes the news. None of this stuff makes the news. These kamikaze drones, supplied by none other than who? Anybody know? The Iranians. The Iranians are now involved in Europe. And that's a key thing. That's a key step in what's playing out strategically. Because the Iranians have no more significant mortal enemy from their perspective than who? Than the nation of Israel. So you know what Israel's getting ready to do? And some of you know this. Nobody can develop weapons like the Israelis, right? Except the Americans, perhaps. But talk about a weapons industry. Guess what Israel's getting ready to do? They're getting ready to ship weapons to Ukraine because Iran's involved. Are you ready now for Ezekiel 38? We talked about Ezekiel 38 2 weeks ago, right? Wars and rumors of wars. There's the stage. It's crazy town we find ourselves in. You thought 2 years ago when we were standing in line at Sam's was surreal. Things are getting really surreal. But you won't see this on ABC, NBC, CNN. They don't want you to know. They want you to focus on what the Broncos are doing. And we all know that not very well. Neither the Chiefs, right? Right. So, they're supplying these drones The Shahid drones, 136 drones is what they're calling them. And guess where they're launching them from? You know who's getting bombed with these drones? They're called kamikaze drones because remember the old kamikaze pilots in Japan that were flying? They gave those Japanese pilots just enough gas to get them to an aircraft carrier out in the Pacific. And they said, we can't go home because we're going to die in the ocean, so let's just crash our plane into the ship. So these are expendable drones that are armed to the hilt, and they've taken out the oil and gas industry stuff around Kiev and now the electrical infrastructure. Why? They want to freeze the Ukrainians because winter's just right around the corner. Where was everybody getting their natural gas from? Russia. Including Europe. This thing is orchestrating really incredibly in my mind. So Israel announces it will send arms shipments to Kiev. Dmitry Medvedev, who used to be the president, kind of did a little stint between Putin's two different periods, if you remember that, said this just on Monday. He said, and warned Israel that if you make this move, we will destroy you. Ezekiel 38. Now, an explicit Russian warning to Israel. I'm blown away. That same day in Moscow, the Moscow city government printed a bunch of new metro passes, their subway system, with these words on their metro passes. Nuclear war, question mark? Use the metro. It saves, it's the safest place in a nuclear situation. Conditioning, maybe? Preparing their people? Just yesterday, 24 Iranian kamikaze drones are seen in the skies of Kiev and hitting fuel depots and electrical installations. Yesterday, October 18th, Iran is promising to transfer, are you ready for this, surface-to-surface missiles to Belarus. So Russia is now responding to the West when we started sending big-time weapon systems into the Ukraine. That's why Ukraine made some progress over the last several months since the summer. What's really concerning is the Europeans are starting to really freak out. And something that you won't get in the press, and it's been going on for the last 2 weeks, there have been massive protests in places like places like Prague, Czechoslovakia, in Paris, in Belgium. For what? You know what they're saying? Let's get out of NATO because we don't want to get nuked. Let's bail now before it's too late. So you're seeing this very powerful North Atlantic Treaty Organization alliance, NATO, which is a military alliance, falling apart right before our eyes because the Europeans are saying, we don't want to die. So the European Union, the EU, is falling apart right before our eyes. Iran is promising to I already read this one. On October 18th, U.S. military detected, are you ready for this one? This is yesterday. U.S. military detected 2 Russian Tupolev 95 strategic bombers flying off the coast of Alaska in the Bering Sea. Just yesterday. Did anybody hear that on the news? No.
Are you sharing where you're getting all
No. If I tell you, I'll have to kill you. Nathan knows. He's my source, actually. Russian bombers off the coast of Alaska. Again, yesterday, this happened. He's still in town. The British Defense Minister Ben Wallace made an urgent and unplanned trip to Washington. He's there right now. Did you catch that on the news? No, you won't. They don't want you to know. They want you to focus on your football team. What was that crazy dude divorcing his wife a few weeks? Their court hearing or their divorce was on the news for like 2 months straight. And all of America was just, oh man, see where we're at? It's called deception. It's getting you blinded so you don't have an understanding of the times and you lose perspective and whatever. Moving to today, just today, Russian President Putin has declared martial law in the Donbass, which gives him more and stiffer control over what's going on there. And just today, Joe Biden announced the release of 15 million barrels of oil from our strategic oil reserves after the Saudis snubbed their nose at this administration, begging them to give us oil or send us oil so that we can lower. Why is he taking this from the oil supply right now, the strategic oil supply? Lower the price before the elections. How do we know that? That was the deal he was trying to strike with the Saudis. Get us some cheap oil now. Let's flood the market. Let's bring it down to $3 a gallon, except in California. Let's bring it down to $3 a gallon. And these stupid Americans who are more concerned about Johnny Depp and the Kansas City Chiefs, these stupid Americans will forget. And you can raise the price after in November. That was the deal that they were trying to strike. Well, I know a president that was trying to strike the same deal an administration ago that was trying to be impeached for doing exactly the same thing with Ukraine. He says, clean up your act, get rid of all the corruption, and then we'll send you the money. But nothing happens here. Remember one of those key elements that we talked about last week? When we get to the days of Noah, remember the days of Noah? There's two things that if you want to really understand the days of Noah, you're not going to glean the days of Noah out of the New Testament. You have to go back to Genesis chapter 6. And there's two things that the Spirit of God reveals to us in that chapter that was going on, characteristics in the days of Noah. You know what it was? Violence and corruption. You better be ready, folks. Our world is going to get more violent. Now, I'm not talking about wars and rumors of wars. Jesus already draws that distinction. I'm talking in our neighborhoods. I'm talking in our lives. I told my wife the other day, man, when you go to Walmart, you park as close to the front door as you can. It's getting nuts. It's getting crazy. What's going on in China and in Asia? Breaking news. On Saturday, October 5th, President Xi Jinping opened up the CCP summit. The CCP is the Chinese Communist Party, announcing that full control of Hong Kong has finally been achieved. Remember, they promised the Brits when the Brits left a few years ago in 2014, don't worry, man. Hong Kong will still stay free. Yeah, right. It's all ours now. Remember the protests? Nobody came to their rescue. Young students, we want to live like we lived since World War II. Well, no more. And this is what he said next. This is the president of China, Xi Jinping. Hong Kong has been achieved, and are you ready for this? And Taiwan is next. Remember our study from a few weeks ago? The one China policy? In China's view, Taiwan has never been anything but Chinese. Anybody know why Taiwan is so strategic, especially to the U.S.? Microchips. Chips. That's where they're all manufactured. If you want you know why we have no cars? Talk to Charles Archuleta. Go drive by the Kia dealership. Anybody, did you drive by the Enterprise place today? 2 cars in their fleet. Chips, hearing aids, you name it, man. So guess who's going to dominate that market once they get Taiwan? Here's what's really interesting. Today, we sent a fleet of B-1B bombers to Guam. Anybody hear that in the news? Today. And there will be wars and rumors of wars, Jesus said. I've been around this planet for a little while. Long while, my wife will say. I have never seen it like this. And we lived in Europe during the Cold War. We lived in Europe when there was this threat that it could happen anymore. But you know what? I felt safe in Europe. That's not the case anymore, man. And I don't know if you guys have seen it, and I would encourage you to do it, but New York City did a PSA the other day, a public service announcement to all their citizens. Maybe David and Amy could bring that up on YouTube. Just do a New York City PSA, David. This is nuts. This is how Americans think. Preparing New York City for a nuclear attack. Are you ready for this? I'm sure he could find it. I'm sorry, yeah, a public service announcement. I saw this the other day and I said, are you kidding me? Is this where we're at? And then in the Middle East, on October 18th, besides what I already shared with you about Israel starting to send armaments to Ukraine, in the Middle East, today, Australia made a decision to withdraw its recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And I think that's just a matter of time. Australia is the first country to start or rethinking the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. So everybody's going to move their embassies back to Tel Aviv. We saw Boomtown, man. We saw some booming things happening with America when we took that step. Genesis chapter 12, verse number 3. God was very explicit with Abraham. I'm going to bless those nations that bless you, dude. And I'm going to curse them that curse you. Look around this country, man. Why is it that we get behind Iran like we do? You know why? Because Iran is Israel's number one enemy. What does that tell you about where we're at? Hang on for the ride, America. I don't know what November 9th is going to bring, to be honest with you. I have some notions. Have you ever been to a Chiefs-Raiders game? A Chiefs-Raiders game on steroids. That's a stupid analogy, but did you find it, Amy? Oh, here it goes. Look. Is it here? Okay. Check this out. This is how Americans or New York City is preparing for the Russians. The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. Yeah, that's it, David. That's it. I'm sorry? Do you want me to use the mic? Oh, Paul does. I'm sorry, it's over here, Paul. I'm sorry? Oh. Is this the short one, David? Like a minute 37, huh? Yeah, this is the one. Because there's a couple other 5-minute ones or something. Go ahead. No, we'll do the question after. Check this out, folks.
So there's been a nuclear attack. Don't ask me how or why, just know that the big one has hit.
Has New York City gone too far with this public service announcement?
There are 3 important steps that I want you to remember.
The city's Office of Emergency Management released this ad telling residents what to do in the event of a nuclear attack.
Get in your apartment.
The host tells people to take cover indoors immediately. If you're outside when the strike occurs, residents are advised to shower and bag Then pay attention to local media for information and next steps. Many are comparing the PSA to a 1951 film put out by the Civil Defense, using a fictional turtle to tell kids how to respond to a nuclear incident back then.
Now, you and I don't have shells.
This was Tasuki School, by the way, back in the day.
Cover up in our own way. First, you duck, and then you cover.
But the comparisons aren't flattering. Many are calling both PSAs unhelpful. While there are no imminent threats against the city, Mayor Eric Adams says New York remains a top target for terrorism. He says the ad wasn't meant to be alarmist, but rather to help residents prepare in the event of this worst-case scenario.
Anyway, you got this is how it ends. Yeah, I'm sure.
Even though the event of a nuclear weapon incident happening in the city is low. For Inside Edition Digital,
Get inside, throw your contaminated clothes in the trash, and listen to CNN. They'll tell you what to do next. You got this. Okay. Hey, David, do we want to do a question? Yeah, that was a little bit of a different one, but yeah, I think it's kind of absurd. There's no preparation going on for anything.
Are you there?
Yes,
Okay.
I am.
Steve Harper
Uh-huh.
asked about what about New Zealand's stand on Israel?
What about New Zealand's stand on Israel? I think you're seeing the entire world beginning to turn on Israel. I'm not sure specifically or what explicitly he might be referring to. But is it some, maybe you could get a follow-up, Larry. But I don't have to tell you that New Zealanders and Australians are pretty much the same culture, the same people group. So I'm sure whatever Australia does, New Zealand would or might follow. The Australians are a little bit more conservative politically than New Zealanders are, for the most part. But yeah, it's just a matter of time. Just get ready for a lot and a ton of anti-Semitism that's going to really raise its ugly head. It already is, but it's gonna blow up more significantly in the coming weeks and months. So anyway, that's our news thing for the week, and I will keep you informed as best I could. Michelle has a question or a comment or a thought.
It's just a thought. I'm wondering after November 9th or prior to, we're going to start seeing more and more of nuclear. I mean, it already started with the president saying Armageddon, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to start seeing more and more PSAs. Mm-hmm. And I think that is going to ignite perhaps martial law in the United States as an emergency. Mm-hmm. That's my thought.
I usually don't like to assume too much, mm-hmm. but it's very likely.
I think it is.
So I will communicate to you just the facts, just what we've already witnessed, especially like this past week, but also share some ideas and some thoughts of what to prepare for. Here's what I do believe, and just to kind of echo that thought, I don't think we need nukes to have martial law imposed. We are more divided than I have ever seen this country. I'm going to talk about that briefly, because in this first point that we're going to unpack in a little bit, Israel fell apart in the Old Testament because of civil war. That's what caused the division. The 10 northern tribes went to war with the 2 southern tribes. And after that, Israel was never the same. So it happened to us 100 years ago, right? 150 years ago. And it could happen again. Different circumstances, different issues, different agendas. But at the end of the day, we are an extremely, extremely, extremely divided people on a number of issues. So regardless of who wins, regardless of what happens, there's going to be a lot of finger pointing. There's a lot of hatred. There's a lot of spite. There's a lot of death threats happening at the highest levels of this government. about killing your fellow Americans, about and why they want to do what they want to do with the Second Amendment, because that they've already disarmed the entire rest of of Western culture. I've said this from the beginning. I was talking to somebody just this past week. America could never be invaded, I don't think, by a foreign power. There's too many weapons out there, man. They would be fools. They would be idiots. We're gonna destroy ourselves. We're gonna destroy ourselves. I believe. That's what ultimately will play out. How do we know that? Jesus' last words as he finally says, I'm done with these folks. In Matthew chapter 12, as he looks the Pharisees straight in the eye and we're straight in the face, he says, you know what, dudes? A house divided will not stand. Those are his words. That's where we're at. We're exactly where Israel was in 1 Kings chapters 12 and 13 when civil war played out. And why did civil war happen? Why did Israel ultimately fall apart? Their king, King Solomon, in 1 Kings chapter 10, took his eyes off God and began to focus on his what? On his stuff. Colossians. Set your affection on things above and not the things of this earth, right? And if you get down to the 5th verse, he says, you know what's wrong with you guys? You know what what Paul is warning the Colossian believers about? He says, don't allow yourself to become covetous, because covetousness is what? Idolatry. We've become, as a culture, a bunch of idolaters. We call it stuff. Fancy buildings, fancy cars, fancy houses. And you know what it did? It took America, it took our culture off God and focused on things. This is called a remez. There are echoes throughout history. There are echoes in the Bible. History repeating itself is another way to put it. We are following, and there are only 2 nations in all of history that have been founded on God's word. The nation of Israel and the United States of America. This was an amazing experience. I wake up still to this day grateful for being fortunate to have been born in this country. But it's not the country that I grew up loving and knowing today. It's heartbreaking to see where we're at. Being real, man. Just being real. So we're in the famine part. Next week we'll look at pestilences, right? We know what that's about. We're going to look at this whole COVID stuff. And are you guys aware of the fact that there's a new variant coming out? We'll talk about that next week. Are you ready for your 30-second booster shot? Get ready. Then we're going to talk about some of these, a lot of people climate change. You know what I call it biblically, from a biblical worldview? It's a planet in travail, just like a pregnant woman. There's change coming, and the planet knows it. It ain't climate change. It ain't about a Green New Deal. God revealed in his word, both in Romans and in the book of Isaiah, if my creatures will not worship me, my creation will. And it will. His creation is yearning for him to come back. That's what number 5 is about. The last 5 that Amy's going to throw up on the screen are these. We're going to talk about number 6 is going to be the path to the New World Order. I'm going to show you some crazy stuff where the stage is being set by some incredible evil forces. I'm going to introduce you to a guy by the name of Klaus Schwab and an interesting, funky little Jewish dude from Tel Aviv, from actually Haifa, Israel, who is the brains and he's the philosopher behind what Klaus Schwab is suggesting. I recommend it, and I would recommend to every one of you that you guys buy Klaus Schwab's book. This is a very evil, very, very terrible human being who is using an organization known as the World Economic Forum to bring about what he's referring to as the Great Reset. He's giving you and laying out for you in his book the plan, their agenda that they have in place to bring about the New World Order. Anybody know where the phrase New World Order first came out? George Bush, 1992. Are you guys ready for this? September 11th, 1992. And it was his boy, George Jr., where 9/11 happened. Coincidence, I'm sure. Maybe a remiss. A new world order. There's always been an agenda. So part of what you see playing out in the Ukraine and why Russia and China are pushing back is that. Not that they're right, don't get me wrong. It's because of what's been transpiring throughout history between the East and the West. The Great Schism of 1054, when the Catholic Church split between the Eastern Church and the Western Church, is where it all began, man. And they have been fighting and killing each other till now. Yes?
So another question from online.
Mm-hmm.
Kathy Pina wants to know if Gog and Magog happened before or after the rapture.
The question is, does the Gog and Magog war out of Ezekiel 38 happen before the rapture? I think we kind of covered and provided you an answer a few weeks ago when we did the Wars and Rumors of War study, but here's what I will say. I don't know. It could. You know why? Because the rapture is a New Testament mystery. It's a New Testament truth. And Ezekiel is an Old Testament perspective of the end times. So it's not explicit. It could. It could. Absolutely. You guys know about what I believe of when the rapture seasonally will occur, will happen. I'm not date setting. I'm not a date setter by any means, but I believe that it's going to happen for a number of reasons in this spring and not the fall like a lot of other people teach. And I've got my reasons why. Biblically, it's not just a thing that I throw out there. So if the rapture happens in the spring, Gog and Magog war could happen next week. The way things are happening. Could happen next month. The way things are playing out. Especially with Israel getting ready to send weapons to Ukraine. And Iran involved. Isn't it interesting that 2 Middle Eastern countries are now engaged in Europe? God's amazing on how he orchestrates stuff. So that said, it could. It could. We definitely could witness that great war that the Bible speaks about in the book of Ezekiel, chapter number 38. The war, and it's not called a battle, the war of Gog and Magog. And again, I would encourage you to go back to that study. It's already on YouTube. I'm not sure what the date is on that, Larry. Maybe you could look at it on the YouTube thing, on the YouTube channel. Give me the dates so they can go back and look at it. But we specifically unpack some verses out of Ezekiel 38 on that war. So then we're going to look at the parable of the fig tree. We're going to look at what the Bible says about who and what that fig tree represents and who it is and the significance of that prophecy in Matthew 24, verses 3. And then the days of Noah. Wow. Hang on to that one, man. That one is going to be a really fascinating study, and we're going to talk about some of the things that are already happening with DNA and genetic engineering, CRISPR, transhumanism, some of those things that were happening in the days of Noah. And then we'll look at the times of the Gentiles in Luke 21. That's a really key passage because that involves us. You live right now in what the Bible and what Jesus referred to as the times of the Gentiles, which will quickly come to an end once Jesus and God in his ultimate plan shifts gears and begins to focus on Israel in the tribulation period. And then we'll finish and we'll end with some cultural signs, some things that we're all having to deal with culturally, and the sin and the evil that is so prevalent in our culture today. And when I talk about our culture, I mean American culture. and why I really believe we're going to experience some judgment very, very soon because of what's playing out. I heard an interesting fact last Friday when we attended the CareNet banquet. I didn't know this, but there's only three systems, governmental systems on the planet that abort their children up to the day of birth. North Korea, China, and the state of New Mexico. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. So there's an election in a couple weeks. I absolutely love what God said to the children of Israel as they were looking across the Jordan Valley. He said, there's the land. You got to make a choice. Choose life or death, blessing or cursing, but you better choose. Yes, sir. We have a question here, Paul? That's, you know what we're trying to do? We're trying to capture it so the people online could hear the question.
So I was reading that book you told me on the Great Reset, but I was looking back at history, how many times America has invented themselves, and they said it was like 5 times.
Yeah.
And the last time it happened was when Teddy Roosevelt in 1933, 36 hours after he took over office for president, he ordered this 10-day bank holiday, and he went into every safe deposit box in America and pulled the gold coins out and put a $20 bill. And then 1 week later, gold was up to 35. And then you're talking about Rome, how it's just disguised themselves, but they were talking about how Rome has reinvented themselves 11 times, and Russia tried to do it, and they couldn't even do it, and that must have been when it was Soviet Union. It turned into Russia,
right,
and the USSR. So those, and it happened in the times of Lincoln, when he did this. That's why he was so hated, because of some paper bonds that he needed for the war, and he reset the nation. So this Great Reset is not something, it hasn't happened in America. It's just probably going to be the last one. So
yeah. And I want us to keep in mind when we look at number 6 that this is not an American Great Reset, it's a worldwide reset, is the push behind the World Economic Forum. That's where Klaus Schwab is coming from. So, and as I've been saying from the very, very, very beginning, this is what we can't lose sight of. What you're seeing happening right before our eyes, especially when it comes to that particular sign, is the stage being set. The stage has to be set. I've used that little illustration or metaphor about the Santa Fe Opera, right? What are those things called? The props are all in place. All we're waiting for are the actors. The systems are in place. There's a reason why, and we're going to talk about this extensively next week, why COVID had to happen and who was behind that. You guys need to study the dude that was instrumental in bringing about the pandemic, a guy by the name of Anthony Fauci, and who he's associated with and what he was involved with. He's an evil man. We're on Facebook right now. We'll probably get cut off or canceled tonight, but I'll tell you what, man, it's unbelievable what he did. I'm going to share you some things with you about some things that transpired, how he was involved in preparing and in funding the Chinese to do what they did in Wuhan. It's called gain of function. I've told you guys a number of times, go study that phrase, go study that thought. And here we find ourselves. It wasn't a pandemic, it was a planned-demic. Don't kid yourself. Interesting timing though, right? Interesting timing. Why? And you're going to see it here in a minute. Control. The system has to control you, and they're going to do anything and everything to control you. Man, that's what made this place so special, is liberty and freedom. That's biblical. Where the Spirit of God is, there's liberty. That's our sermon this Sunday in the book of Esther. A new law of liberty, man. God is all about freedom. freedom to worship, freedom to choose. God doesn't force you or me to worship him, but there's consequences either way, man. And that's being stripped away day by day. That's the heartbreaking part for me. And it needs to happen in order for them to do what they have planned to do as part of the Great Reset, right? The idea, not that this is a big deal for me, you will own nothing and you will be happy. That's kind of the theme of the one-worlders, the globalists. And just know and realize that at the highest levels of our government, they are in complete accord and falling in line with the globalist agenda. That's why there are no borders. I find it interesting that our country is more concerned about our Ukrainian border than they are our southern border. And keep in mind that southern border is not just about immigration. It's not about just people coming in illegally. You know what it's really about? It's about sex trafficking. It's about human trafficking. It's about fentanyl coming in. There are a lot of people making a lot of money through an open border. Don't ever lose sight of this truth, this principle that Paul revealed to Timothy, and we talked about it briefly last week, 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse number 10. He says to Timothy, Timothy, never forget that the love of money, not money, the love of money is what? The root of all evil. All evil. And there's so many people on the take, man, at every level of government. A lot of people making a lot of money. Trafficking, human trafficking. Can I show you a really interesting thing that we're going to talk about when we get to Revelation? Maybe we'll get to chapter 17 or when we get to in heaven and we'll unpack it in the rapture or after the rapture. But look at Revelation 17. I want to show you the priorities of this wicked Roman system that we're a part of, frankly. When we talk about Western civilization, that's really where it originates. Paul?
I've got a question.
Okay, you have a question?
No,
Augusta, go ahead, Augusta.
So do you think there is a possibility that the rapture will not happen until, like, say, the middle of the tribulation? Like, you know, the 3 years of peace,
Yeah.
and then there's the 3 years of...
You know what? You know what? We're going to talk about that when we get to like some more different signs closer to the end of this study, because I don't want to go off on a big rabbit trail tonight.
Yeah.
Because what you're referring to are the different theological notions about a pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, or no rapture. Yeah. There's all kinds of schools of thought out there. Mm-hmm. And I just don't want to go there tonight because we'll end up taking 45 minutes just talking about that.
Okay.
Okay? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's
but
fine.
we'll definitely address it. Uh-huh. Yes, ma'am. Marie?
I'd just like to make a comment that we heard the other day. A politician in Mexico said, show me a politician that's poor, and I'll show you a poor politician.
Wow. I love that. I love that. So true. Gosh, I'm looking for the passage real quick. It's in Revelation chapter 17, maybe 18. Oh, shoot. Oh, yeah, here it is. It's actually chapter 18. Which is, and again, I can't wait to get to chapters 17 and 18 because you find the phrase or the word Babylon, mystery religion, show up in the text. So what we're going to do when we get here, we're going to take you all the way back to Genesis chapter 10, to the source, the chapters 10, 11, to show you where and how this system came about and why it's still relevant today, why it's still having an impact on the world. And a huge impact. And in chapter number 18, in the book of Revelation, you see her revealed, the system being revealed in chapter 17. And what's really fascinating, she's referred to as Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth, down in 17 and verse 5. That's how the Bible, that's how Jesus perceives this system. Calls her a whore. And that's all she's been doing for the last 2,000 years, is going a whoring with governments. So that said, in the 18th chapter, she's destroyed. The system is destroyed. And listen real quick on how the Bible describes how the merchants of the world, the profiteers, the sex trade people, the people that are profiting from fentanyl making its way. You know what? We went to feed the homeless the other day, man. There's so many people drugged out. It's crazy. It's insane. I was talking to somebody that, man, I remember where people were genuinely coming to eat and they could actually sit at a table and have lunch without passing out. There's a street in Philadelphia, I forget the name of it. They call it Zombieland. And people are just walking around literally like zombies from fentanyl coming in from China. Look at verse number 11. And the merchants of the earth, they shall weep and they shall mourn over her. For no man buyeth their merchandise anymore, and the merchandise of gold and of silver and of precious stones and of pearls and of linen and of purple and of silk and of scarlet and all fine wood and all the manners of vessels of ivory and all the manner of vessels of most precious wood and of brass and iron and marble and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beasts and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and what? And the souls of men. Interesting that that's low on her priority, huh? It's a wicked system, man. It's been lying and deceiving people since Genesis chapter number 10 and 11. And God's going to deal with her once and for all in the book of Revelation, praise God. So, we don't want to go on another rabbit trail about Mystery Babylon, but we'll definitely get to your question about the rapture in not a couple of weeks. You know better than that, but soon, I promise. I promise, soon. So let's look at real quick at our outline from last week. These are the 3 points that we threw up on the screen. I don't mean threw up, but put up on the screen. We're in part 2, the signs of the times. When I talk about the order of events, this is where we're talking about looking at some of those things. I'm just not sure when we're going to finish all 10 signs. Is that all right, Augusta? So when we get to part 3, we'll start looking at the importance and the significance of the events. I think that will also help answer Kathy Pito's question about Gog, Magog, rapture, whatever. So that's where we're at. So on the next slide, Amy, please. This is where we were last week when we were looking at the whole there shall be famines. We looked at a precautionary pass, and if you remember from that part of our study, I shared with you how famine has always been a part of biblical history. In fact, in the Old Testament, you find 10 of them. I think last week I imparted a couple of them to you because one of the things that I don't want you to lose sight of, and this is what I don't want us to ever forget, moving forward, regardless of what transpires on this planet in the coming weeks and months, know and never lose sight of God's providence. Everything that we have been talking about on Sunday mornings in the book of Esther. How is providence defined for us? There's divine guidance playing out. Divine guidance and care. It's God's conceived power sustaining and guiding human destiny. So this world and its systems and everything that we see witnessing and that are playing out, whether it be wars, whether it be famine or pestilences, God is behind the scenes working and making sure that there are still a remnant of people that are embracing and hearing his message and his word and ultimately getting to know his son. That's what we can't lose sight of. If you remember, and we talked about it briefly last week, without famine, the Jews would have never ended up in Egypt. And without ending up in Egypt, we wouldn't have the book of Exodus. a book that speaks and reveals so much to us about what? About redemption, about God's working. Talk about incredible pictures. You know what we would have never gotten if we would never had the book of Exodus? We wouldn't have what God revealed to the Israelites about the law, about the tabernacle, a dwelling place of God. Where do you find all that stuff? In Exodus. There's another significant famine in the Bible that we looked at briefly last week, and that was the famine that was playing out in and during the book of Judges. The book of Judges, I've shared with you a number of times, is very similar to the day and age in which we find ourselves, right? I've often mentioned the fact that the book of Judges was the most bizarre period in the history of the nation of Israel. 3 times in Judges you find the phrase, and in those days, or the verse, and in those days there was no king in Israel, and every man and woman did which was right in his own eyes. In other words, everything became subjective. Why? Because there was no authority. So you could be whatever you want to be. You know what I just read a couple of weeks ago? There's a company in Cleveland who, in order to accommodate all the different identities that are out there, mark this, you better know this, there's a whole segment of crazy town people that now want to identify as animals, as cats or dogs. You know what they're called? They're called, are you ready for this? Check it out. Check me out, man. Vet me. They're furries. And guess what they're asking for, right? We already went through the let's share the bathroom stuff a couple years ago. Guess what they're asking for? Litter boxes in the bathroom. Check it out, man. Shoot me now. Are we going crazy or what? And in those days, there was no king in Israel. And Kenny could be whatever he wants to be, a furry. It's insane. It's insanity where we're at. So, get this. Putin has this guy, a philosopher by the name of Alexander Dugin, who says, we don't want that nonsense in our culture. And now they're playing the self-righteous role on the planet, right? The moral authority to the world. And you know what I said? Remember I said this a few weeks ago? He's absolutely right. He's spot on. So you better be careful as Americans, because if you know anything about your Bible, you better know and understand that Alexander Dugin is part of the lie that is being fed into Putin's ear about this moral authority. Well, guess who his big ally is? Another self-righteous, pious system known as Iran. And there's protests going on in Iran right now because of their concept of morality, where a young Kurdish woman who wasn't wearing her hijab quite right was killed by the religious police. And now the country's going crazy and nuts. And see how jacked up the world is, man? This is why we need Jesus. Seriously. This is why we need to set our affection on things above and not the things of this earth. I was hanging out with somebody earlier. I don't know. Earlier in the week. I forget who. A couple of days ago. And we were talking about this crazy stuff. Anyway, so please, no litter boxes at Ascent Bible Church. Or we have some fake grass on this side of the building. If you need to go out there. Right. We'll just give you a pooper scooper. I'm telling you, man, when I refer to crazy town, it's like absolute nut house crazy town. And it's getting crazier by the day. So, man, in spite of the craziness in the book of Judges, and if you go back to the book of Ruth, I think we touched on this a little bit last week. I want to just echo this thought. The book of Ruth is an absolute beautiful and incredible book that has an amazing love story playing out. And the way that love story played out was because Israel fell so far away from God during the book of Judges that God brought about a famine. And you guys know this story. It was because of that famine that Naomi and her daughters end up in a place called Moab. Not Utah, but Moab, southern Israel. And it was there where they met a young lady by the name of Ruth, a Gentile Moabitess. And you know what they did in the book of Ruth? They brought her back to Bethlehem, where she met her kinsman redeemer, Boaz. And they fell in love. So in the midst of chaos, there's this backstory playing out, a love story that plays out between Boaz and Ruth. Here's the principle in terms of where we find ourselves. And don't be dismayed. As crazy and as nutty and as bizarre as this world gets, there's a love story playing out between Jesus Christ and his church that needs to play out. There's our hope. There's the perspective that we can't ever lose sight of. And then after the whole chaotic situation with Solomon and the civil war that I mentioned earlier that happens in the book of 1 Kings chapters 11, 12, and 13, Jeroboam and Rehoboam go to battle. The nation is divided. The 10 northern tribes, the 2 southern tribes. All of a sudden, God begins to raise up these guys referred to in the Bible as prophets. The major prophets that we know of, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Daniel, and 12 little minor prophets that show up on the scene. And the first prophet to show up historically or chronologically is a little prophet from a little area just south of Bethlehem known as Amos. Famous Amos. Baking cookies up in the hilltops. I love this guy. He knows his Bible good. And here's what's so cool about Amos. Amos shows up on the scene, and God sends him to the northern part. He's a southerner, mind you. And he sends him to the northern part of Israel to preach to those 10 northern tribes that had fallen away, that had abandoned God. And this is what he says to them in Amos chapter 8 and verse number 11. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord God, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. There we are. Anybody try to share the gospel recently? I've shared with you a video a number of times, a couple times, of these Chinese believers that are being persecuted in mainland China for even meeting underground. And there's a really cool scene where this American missionary dropped off a bunch of Bibles, a suitcase full of Bibles, and they ripped that suitcase apart just to get to those Bibles. And there's this scene where this young lady grabs her Bible, the first time she's ever had a Bible in her life, and she holds it like this, and she's kissing her Bible, and she's weeping. And I thought to myself, wow, Lord, what happened to our country? We have a bunch of Bibles up in our storage unit. How would Americans respond if we took one of those boxes to the plaza tonight after Bible study? Or tomorrow when all the tourists are there? See where we're at. We're part of responding exactly like those 10 northern tribes, man. So he sends Amos. You know what his name means? To bear a burden. That's our calling. This guy heeded God's call. He went to a people he didn't even know, mind you. He's a southerner. He's from the tribe of Judah. The key phrase in the book of Amos, if you go back and study, it's found twice in Amos chapter 5, verse 4, and in Amos 5, 6. Seek the Lord, and ye shall live. Isn't that awesome? Seek the Lord and ye shall live. That's our message to a lost, dying, and hopeless world. Not politics. Whatever happens on November 9th is going to happen. How can you think like that, John? It's in the Bible. Go read Daniel chapter 2, verse 25 sometime. But you know what the world needs? They need the Lord. And we hold that message. One of the key thoughts that I want to consider, and this was a verse that God revealed to me years ago, man, when I was up in Kansas City trying to figure this whole thing out. And this verse spoke to me. To this day, I challenge men and women in our church to embrace this verse because it spoke to me personally. And Amos says, in Amos chapter 7, verse number 14, I was no prophet, neither was I a prophet's son. Let's read the whole thing. Then answered Amos and said to Amaziah, I was no prophet, neither was I a prophet's son, but I was a herdman and a gatherer of sycamore fruit. Verse 15, Amy, please. And the Lord took me as I followed the flock, and the Lord said unto me, go prophesy unto my people Israel. God doesn't care about your background. He doesn't give a flip of what you've had to been through and all the craziness and nonsense. He redeemed you because he has a purpose and a plan for you. My dad was no rabbi, no priest, no anything. That's where Amos was coming from. I was just a dude herding goats and sheep. And every once in a while, my grandfather's trees would produce fruit. And I would go pick the fruit. And then one day, the Lord spoke to my heart. He says, go prophesy to my people Israel. And he did. I love the book of Amos, man. It's us. It's what we're called to do in the midst of famine. It's what we're called to do regardless of what we see going on in the world. And that's what I love about the Old Testament. Because the one thing that I want us to understand about famine, and a key thought, is that famine sometimes is a huge motivating factor for major changes in the lives and the characters of history. Exodus, Ruth, Amos. I don't know what's going to happen in the coming weeks and months, but I do know this. He's on the throne. We're going to have an understanding of the times so that we got to be able to share what Israel ought to do. And Sylvia's in the room, and she joins us for our leadership meetings. She'll tell you that we're already thinking, we're already planning, we're already brainstorming, we're already praying. And I'm going to be talking about some of those things. So let's look at the second point, and I want to kind of dive into this whole idea of looking at some things even prophetically. So we looked at some history in the Old Testament, that famine has always been a key part of biblical history, and God used and always uses crisis. It's that whole Romans 8:28 thing, right? That all things, including famines, including pestilences, including craziness and bizarre stuff, all things work together for good for those that love God and are called according to his purpose. That's what we can't ever forget. But in the book of Revelation, chapter 6, verses 5 through 6, and we're going to look at this passage in great detail when we do get to the book of Revelation. You guys are familiar with the 7 seals and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. This is where you find what is referred to in the Bible as the black horse. And the black horse, which is, again, giving you a synopsized perspective of the tribulation period. Jesus reveals to us in the text that famine is inevitable in the end times. Look at verse 5. And when he had opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd beast say, come and see. And behold, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And it says in verse 6, is that verse 6, verse 7? That is verse 6. And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 beasts, and a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine. So also Jesus, through the four horsemen of the apocalypse, reveals to us the importance, and not the importance or the significance of food shortages and things like that that are going to play out at the end times or the last days. And as I was sharing with you earlier, I just want to share with you a little video that I was hoping to reveal to you last week, and just again give you and provide you some perspective of the agenda that is out there that we can't lose sight of. Because as I mentioned earlier, and I continue to mention every week, the stage is being set for us like never before. There's a reason why fuel is as expensive as it is. Because you and I know, although we complain about our personal cars and having to pay whatever it is today, and we were up to $4 a gallon. If you're living in California, it's $7 a gallon. Go figure. I don't know if you know this, but combines and tractors and all that machinery that are required to grow our food use diesel fuel. Here's another thing that I want you to be mindful of. And Amy, could you throw these slides up? Look at this slide right here real quick. I wish this green light worked, but I want you to see this. This is the price of diesel in the last 3 years. It's gone up literally 280% in 3 years. The next slide is the price, and this is a huge one. This is big, is the price of fertilizer. Fertilizer has gone up 320% in the last 3 years. And here's what's interesting. For those of you that know a little bit about farming, perhaps, we do a lot of synthetic fertilizing, and this is why we're able to have the yields of crops that we're able to, and the amount of fertilizer that we're able to produce. Well, guess what? The breadbasket for Eastern Europe and a lot of Central Asia comes from the Ukraine. Ukraine was the breadbasket for that part of the world. Guess who the bread and what the breadbasket is in Europe, for Western Europe? Anybody know? Holland. The Netherlands. Guess what they're doing right now? They're destroying those farmers. They're taking their farms. Farmers in the Netherlands are committing suicide because they're getting ready to lose their farms. You know why? Because of the New World Order, because of the World Economic Forum's agenda relative to the price of fertilizer. They can't afford it. Guess what? It's hitting home. Do you think that we're exempt if that's happening in Europe? Those same fuel prices for diesel, for fertilizer? And by the way, do you know how we are able to make synthetic fertilizer? You know what's required for synthetic? It's a process that was invented by these two German chemists like 80 years ago. It's called the Bosch and Lomb something. No, that's eyeglasses. You know how they make, you know how they process and create fertilizer with nitrogen? You need natural gas. And look at where the natural gas supply is today. Look at where it's happened. Guess where a lot of our natural gas is going to end up? Why those two Nord Stream pipelines were sabotaged a few weeks ago. See the agenda, the plan, the things that are happening right before our eyes. Well, if there's a shortage in America for natural gas that processes and creates and helps make nitrogen fertilizer, nitrogen-based fertilizer, how the heck are we able to have crop yields like we need to? So what's the old issue of the old economics thing? Supply and demand, right? If there's no supply, what? You dictate the price. That's exactly what's happening. Watch this video real quick. Paul, could you bring that thing and then we'll take the question. I think this is it. let me back up one screen just to make sure. Yeah, that's it. Are you guys ready? We're going to play it on this screen. I just asked Dave to do it. Oh, sorry.
The Dutch government, a guy called Rutte, the Prime Minister, completely owned by the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. Why has he just announced that the Netherlands, the second biggest exporter of food in the world,
Next to the Klaus Schwab, you will own nothing, but you will be happy. The Great Reset. So lots and lots of things going on. I have another little thing I want to show you real quick, another quick link. This is an interesting little piece of data. Let me find this one real quick. And I think it's right here. See that list? Those are food processing plants. 97 of them since March of last year. This list is only through June that have been burned or destroyed in our country. Plants that process your foods. 97 of them on this list, because this list is not comprehensive. This is only since June. I remember scurrying around trying to buy baby formula for little Jack. It's crazy. So, some really, really significant things to be mindful of that we need to be aware of. So it's no coincidence, not only are we destroying the family farm and farmer and all that they've done in this country and have fed us like they have, man. That's why I love going to Kansas City, because I'm able to drive through Kansas and see wheat fields and farm fields and all of these amazing places as I drive through them. I think, man, what a place of abundance. What a country. And if you've never done that, man, do it. It's an amazing thing to consider. And now those farms are being lost to the likes of the Bill Gates of hell, who now owns 270,000 acres of farmland in this country. Why? I'm sure it's a coincidence, right? Why is Bill Gates buying farmland? So somebody has a question, I think. Marie? Okay. Paul? Anybody? Okay.
I was just curious with Russia,
Uh-huh.
and they're not in line with what they're doing with, like Klaus Schwab, and are they doing their own?
Yeah, obviously it's a conflict of cultures, right? So who are their allies? The two major powers that are in bed with each other that want nothing to do with Klaus Schwab in the West and the World Economic Order. Do you remember when during the G7, which ultimately became the G20, when Putin was ostracized and he was out at this little picnic area just eating by himself because of what happened in 2016 when Russia took the Crimea? That's when things began to go downhill. And you know what he did? I'm going to get in bed with the Chinese. And that's exactly what they've done. That's exactly what they're doing. The Chinese will ally themselves with anybody who they can profit from. They don't care, right? This is what so annoys me about a lot of, quote, American companies. Google, Apple, they're not American companies. They're globalists. They're global companies, right? Why is nobody concerned about what the Chinese are doing to the Uyghurs. You know why we're able to get made in China everywhere? Why the least expensive items that are why do people go to China to manufacture? They've got slave labor. It's cheap products, but no labor. It's free labor. But you know what? People don't care. You know why? Because Apple says North Face can say I can make these shoes for $5 and sell them to John for $150. Stupid John. Right? It's a global economy. I'm not denying that. But Chinese don't care. They're gonna get an end. Why do they want Taiwan? They'll control the microchip market. You won't even be able to get a car. I have a brother-in-law who ordered one of those fancy Broncos 6 months ago. He's still waiting on it. I'm telling you, you're seeing the beginning. And here's another issue that you have to be mindful of, you have to be aware of. And this is the bigger challenge for us. Things aren't going to get any cheaper. Right? This big lie about what are they titling that act? Something the Reduction Inflation Act? How absurd is that? Basic Economics 101. Inflation is caused by one simple principle: too much money chasing too few goods. So the less supply there is, and you keep printing money like toilet paper, ask what happened to the Germans under the Weimar Republic after World War I. It took a whole wheelbarrow of money to buy a loaf of bread. Our money is becoming worthless. They're going to take it. You will own nothing and you will be happy. I'm going to keep quoting their mantra. Question?
No, it's just kind of weird because I remember watching those movies, The Hunger Games.
Yeah.
This is like exactly playing out
Yeah.
like The Hunger Games. Like it was like in that book. I got reset. It said on May of 2022, members of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, over 2,000 leaders gathered, and just like you're saying, why is Bill Gates buying so much farmland? And it's just playing out like the Hunger Games. And when I go to the park and witness to these kids on Saturdays or other days, I try and use stuff like that and say, well, you ever see the movie The Hunger Games? And I go, I've heard of this movie, I never watched it, but the other one was The Purge. And just by passing by Redbox, you see how I would stop and look at these movies. I don't own a TV, but I see they just got worse and worse and worse. And I was like, these days are coming like that.
You want to hear something? And here's a phrase that I would consider you guys doing some research on: predictive programming. Study that phrase out. You know what it started for me? A movie that freaked me out, going to the Yucca Drive-In back in the day with some of my cousins. They threw me in the trunk to seek me in so that we didn't have to pay the $2 to get me into the Yucca Drive-In. Do you guys remember the movie Soylent Green with Charlton Heston?
Yeah.
Food supply. Soylent Green. Soylent Green. You could probably find it on Prime or one of those. The devil's known. He's always had an agenda.
Hollywood knows.
He owns Hollywood. It's not Hollywood, it's Hollywood. And they're preparing the world like never before. Just know that. Keep your eyes on Jesus and not what Hollywood is doing. And you're going to be okay. You're going to be fine. You're going to be okay. Which leads us to the last principle. How do we prepare? How do we consider and be mindful of what it means to be prepared? First and foremost, we also need to not ever allow fear to enter into our hearts. That's been one of the biggest issues and one of the biggest challenges for the body of Christ. Like never before, we need to be fearless, right? But we're going to also be responsible. We're going to be loving. We need to be caring. And the Bible reveals to us principles, right? We saw the whole Amos thing. What is this? What was his theme, or what was the theme of the key phrase? To bear a burden, to bear a load. We're going to have to be able to bear one another's burdens in the coming weeks and months, or however long it is till Jesus calls us home. Whenever that day is, We're going to occupy till he comes. We need to be and we need to stay fearless. This is why Paul, one of the last things he says to the young man that he loved dearly, that he considered his spiritual son, in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, the very last letter that he writes before he goes to be with Jesus is, Timothy, God didn't give you a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. Embrace that verse. Embrace it. So we need to what? First and foremost, understand that God's in charge. We talked about the power of God in our lives last Sunday. It's the Holy Spirit in your life. He's going to comfort you. He's going to guide you. He's going to lead you unto all truth. Keep you from allowing this world to deceive you. Love is the second one. Don't lose sight that you're his child. You're going to find more security, and you're going to find and know and realize that you're going to be okay with whatever this world throws at you because of his love for you. And then the third thing, a sound mind. We have to be sober and stay sober. What does that mean? Yeah, it has nothing to do with alcohol biblically. You know what it means? Right-mindedness. Being practical in some of the things that we need to realize and accomplish. So here's our proof text for what and where I'm headed as we bring our study to a close. In Proverbs chapter 6, I love this passage, verses 4 through 9. You find the wisest man that ever lived sharing some thoughts, sharing his heart about life. And I'm grateful, and those of you and like Jack and Kenny that I've discipled recently, I always share with them, and this is why I love lessons 10 and 11 in our discipleship ministry and in our discipleship tool. It's the lessons on stewardship. You know what? When people think stewardship or the lesson on giving and the lesson on money and possessions, it has nothing to do with stuff. It has everything to revealing to God's people that everything that we think is ours, that we possess, is really his. He just gave you the privilege of managing it. And you're either a good steward or you're a lousy steward. Luke chapter number 16. And there's three things that God has given us stewardship of. I refer to it often as the 3 T's. Your time. Your time is the most precious thing that you possess. James chapter 4, verse 14. James says, never forget, believers, that life is but a what? But a vapor. It passeth for a season. We're not guaranteed tomorrow. We don't know what the Russians are going to do. God does, but in the meantime, we need to be fearless. We need to bear each other's burdens. We need to look out for each other. Continue to love each other. Know that we're all going to have to be wise as we move forward. So your time is precious. You know what else we're to be good stewards of? Your talents, your gifts, that they are to be used for his glory and his glory alone. You were created by him. You were created for him. And I say this all the time. And until we realize that, life will never make sense. You will never find fulfillment this side of eternity without the Lord Jesus Christ. And you embracing and knowing his purpose and his mission for your life. He didn't bring you this far to bring you this far. There's more to this life than this life. The day that you got saved, you entered into his fullness. Your eternity began at that instant. So you've already been, like he told the disciples, all right, guys, get in the boat, and I'm going to meet you on the other side. There's the promise. Guess what he said to you? Get on the boat. That boat is Jesus Christ. Get on the boat, and I'm going to meet you on the other side. But we forget why. Because in between that command to get in the boat and the other side, what happens in the story in Matthew 14? A storm shows up. Well, guess what? We may be experiencing some storms in the coming weeks. But you know who's in the storm? Jesus Christ. He created the storm. He made this storm. And then he's going to bid us to come. Come on, let's get in the storm with me. And the minute that Peter is focusing and keeping his eyes on Jesus. He is walking on water just like Jesus is walking on water. Why? Because his focus is on Jesus in the midst of the storm. And all of a sudden he hears this boom. Maybe that's a nuke that hits New York City. I don't know. All of a sudden he hears this boom, this lightning, this thunder, and the water shakes and the boat shakes. And Peter, at that instant, he gets his eyes off Jesus and he begins to sink. Why did he sink? Because he took his eyes off the Lord. Forgot the promise. And that's us. We focus so much on circumstances and craziness and nuttiness. I'm not saying you're not aware. That's what Paul's referring to in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 17, 16, somewhere around there, about walking circumspectly. Keeping your head on a swivel, having an understanding of the times, but not so that you can freak out and freak others out, but to prepare. And that's what we're going to read right now in Proverbs chapter 6. Look with me in verse 4. Proverbs chapter 6, verse 4. Thank you, Amy. Give not sleep to thine eyes, nor slumber to thine eyelids. In other words, wake up, Christian. Deliver thyself as a roe from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler. Right? Not remember the fowler in Psalms chapter 91? Right? Who's the fowler in that story? The devil. You know what a fowler is? Anybody know what a fowler is? He's trying to catch birds. He's a trapper. You know you know what that fowler, the hunter, one of the ways he does? He puts these decoys on the water, these fake ducks. Fake churches and fake Christians to draw those ducks in so they could what? So he could snare you. So the only way to stay clear from the fowler is to what? Is to soar. To soar like an eagle. Forgot the dude's name. Anyway. Go to the ant, he says. Look at this verse. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, and consider her ways, and be wise. This next verse, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth food in the harvest. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? He makes a contrast. The two types of creatures, the ant and the sluggard. Let's be ants. What those little ants were doing all summer long? Preparing for winter. Until I showed up with a can of gasoline. No, I'm joking. I would never do that. I would never do that. Just kidding. But I had a magnifying glass one time when I was a kid. Hey, don't laugh. Don't laugh, because you know what? That might be a source of your protein someday. And I'm not kidding. I am not joking. Just ask Bill Gates of hell and you'll know better. Here's my point. Here's where we're going with this. How do we get practical? What do we need to do as a church to consider the ant? Here's some things that we're going to start doing. We're going to start looking at using a whole shelf or whatever space we need in the other room, that little storage area in the slam room, to create a pantry. Knowing and realizing there's going to be people in this body that are going to have to choose between gas and groceries. Seriously. Prices ain't coming down, folks. I'm telling you, mark my words. That's a lie. There's no such thing as an Inflation Reduction Act. Why? Because they're printing more money. And the more money they're printing and the less supply, the more inflation. Remember when you used to get a combination plate at Tomasitas for $7.95? I don't know what Jack paid last night, but it was a lot more than one. It was like double, huh? Consider the ant. You know what else you know what else we're going to do? We're going to bring some people in this church that are pretty expert at canning. They have these fancy crock pots anymore that cook your vegetables like on the fly, and we're going to do some classes in here to help you learn how to maybe buy some inexpensive vegetables while things are still available. I really believe this. I don't think you're going to see a food shortage in this country just yet. But here's what you're going to see. Expensive food. Extremely expensive food. That's the challenge. So let's be wise. And we're going to bring some people in. I don't know, we'll probably sit you guys or whoever wants to be a part of it. We're going to probably do it on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon. We haven't determined that yet. Does everybody know Lorraine Hayes? Does anybody know Bill and Pam Brightwell? Yeah. Expert canners, man. I saw pictures of their pantry. It is mind-blowing. You know what I have in my pantry? Like 18 cans of tuna because Larry won't eat it with me. Some sardines. No, I'm kidding. But start buying bags of rice. Start buying bags of beans. And if you go to the grocery store, buy a couple cans of here or there, an extra bag of beans or things, and bring them to the church because there's somebody in this room that may need some help someday. Or maybe today. And we're going to call it a pantry. You know what else I'm going to do personally? I already cleared off this whole section in my yard where I'm going to put a little greenhouse up. If I could find seed. And the price of seed and how they're controlling seeds even. Sylvia shared with me just last night or yesterday that any personal and private gardens, you're going to have to report them to the government. Yeah. And you know what else I'm going to do? And we also have some experts in this area as well. You guys know Danny and Michelle Marmion, who are sitting right there. They know how to do chickens. They know how to do eggs, or you used to know how to do chickens. Do you still have them? You know what? I'm going to do a coup. I'm going to have to shoot a bunch of coyotes, but nonetheless, I'm going to try my time. You know what? I'm going to bring some eggs to church. Because of that? Owls and, oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I found one. I saw a really cool one at the place down Tractor Joe's or whatever it's called. That's Trader Joe's Tractor Supply. Yeah, Tractor Joe's. You guys know what I meant. Yeah, we just started a whole new store. But you know what? Here's what I'm getting at. Man, I'm so grateful for my grandfather from back in the day. We got people who hunt in this church. We have soldiers. We have farmers. We have people that know how to can. And we're going to prepare you. Whatever you guys think we need to do, you know what? You just let us know. You just let me know. And we'll do what we need to do and what we can do to make sure that we have each other's back moving forward. Bear ye, Paul said in Galatians chapter 6, one another's burdens. I have no idea what there's going to bring, but I'm grateful for the gifts, not just the people that come up here every Sunday morning and lead us in praise and all the other stuff that happens in this church, but there's some gifted people that know how to can and do chickens and eggs and all that cool stuff. Prepare. One phrase, I'm going to leave you with this. It's 9:05. Consider the end. Shall we pray? Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for, man, its beauty and its depth and its perspective. And Lord, whatever you do and whatever you choose to do through this body, through this church from a preparation standpoint, Lord, I just pray that we would look to you to lead us and to guide us and to direct us. And I pray, Lord, that as we move forward, that we don't just focus on the physical needs, but more importantly, the spiritual and emotional needs that we know this world is desperately in need of. Lord, use us. Please, I pray for your glory. I pray that we would be mindful of the message that we need to consider and embrace. And that is the same message that we hear in the book of Amos, that those that seek the Lord shall live. And Lord, that's all that matters. is that people come to the saving knowledge of your precious Son, knowing and realizing that whatever happens in this world, that our kingdom is not of this world. And Lord, we thank you for that, for the hope of glory that only comes from you. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Okay, we have a question. Sylvia. Yes, come on up. And then, actually, we don't have a question.